and BellaV TV. I'm Dr. Katherine Williams, and we're streaming live tonight to both YouTube and Facebook. So please click and like and subscribe to tonight's episode if you're enjoying yourself. This evening, in the midst of the protests worldwide for racial justice, I brought together Michelle Maor and Yusef Miller. Michelle, tonight's conversation is happening because you were confiding in me about some hard truths that you've been encountering over the past few weeks. And those hard truths then have led us to tonight's kind of open-hearted conversation is sort of how we described it. Can you introduce yourself for our audience?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Michelle. My family immigrated to United States in the early 80s, and I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. I work for a global tech company, and through my work, I had an amazing opportunity to move to Australia. So now I live with my son in Australia for a few years until my visa runs out and then I go back to the US. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. And Yusef Miller, you're a member of the Racial Justice Coalition, and you've been really active in many of our local protests. In fact, I saw an op-ed that you had written in the Union Tribune, the San Diego Union Tribune, not too long ago. Now, we met last year during a documentary on school shootings. I really want to thank you for collaborating with me again tonight. So just to start with, Yusef, you have a unique background. I'd love if you could tell us a bit about your childhood and how it led you to join the military.
Okay, yeah. As said before, I'm Yusef Miller, and I grew up in Chester, Pennsylvania, in a housing project called the Lamoken Village Project. We call it the LV for short. And this community was a typical low-income community housing project. It was full of violence, full of crime, drugs, and anything you could think of, sort of gang violence, sort of lifestyle, the typical housing project lifestyle. So when I grew up there, the main thing I could think of as growing up was one, survival, make sure that I don't fall into the wrong crowd and try to survive my environment while trying to do well in school, at the same time. So, and there were a lot of people like me in my community who just wanted to do well and get out of that area. And some people stayed in the area and did well as well. So I'm not saying everyone took flight, but for me, my route out was joining the military after high school. So after I graduated high school, I joined the United States Navy. And I joined as a medical person, so a hospital corpsman. I wanted to help people. I've always been fascinated with science and the human body and just the outreach of helping other people. So I joined as a medical person and a 8404. No, not a lot of people are going to know about that except for our Marine Corps veterans who are listening and some of our Navy veterans, but I was a medic for the Marine Corps as well as the Navy. So I traveled due to that specialty. I traveled and I also served in 2 combat theaters, Iraq and Afghanistan. And I served in Iraq with the Seabees, the US Seabees, which is a construction combat battalion. And then I served with the 7th ESB, the 7th Engineering Support Battalion in Afghanistan in 2011. After that, after I retired in 2011, as a matter of fact, after I got back after 24 years of service. And from there, I occupied my time with social justice. While I was in the military, they reward social justice on your evaluations. So I got to continue to be that way. But once I got out of the military, I put full time helping the homeless, helping Islamophobia, against the anti-Semitism, racial issues, issues against women, children, and we met on school shootings, as a matter of fact, like you just recalled. So those issues came primary, and I could dedicate my entire lifestyle to being an activist.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Yusef, it's amazing to me. I listen to you, and what strikes me is, one of the things that got me thinking about this whole topic of racism and racial injustice. I was talking to Kathy about it, and it feels like sometimes, you know, we both live on the same planet. We come from the same country. We speak the same language. We live in the same time in history, and yet our experiences couldn't be any more different. And it seems like the only difference is just the way we look. And one of the questions I have, and I, you know, it scares me to even ask it because it almost feels like, I don't know, it's scary. But, you know, I thought since we are having this honest and open-hearted conversation, one of the things for me, my personal and direct experience has been, here's the American dream. You work hard, opportunities will open for you, and you'll get wealth, you'll get experiences. And so my parents immigrated to the United States. My dad worked hard, moved up in, you know, at his work. My mom got her education, got a master's. They put 3 kids in school. We took trips going skiing, doing all kinds of, you know, cool stuff. And so it's like, hey, here's the American dream, go get it. And everyone that I know in my circle of, you know, the Jewish community and others in the San Fernando Valley, everyone got what they, you know, they worked hard, they got, you know. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, you know, isn't that the case? And is that not the case? Or is that not your experience? I mean, and what is it that I don't know that I should be aware of? Because my assumption is this is for everybody. So I don't
thank
know.
you for that question. That's a great question. A lot of people look at the African American experience. We've been in Northern America since 1619, and it's an obvious question. You say, if your people have been here since 1619, how come they're in 2020 still struggling, still in housing projects, still in low income areas, when my family came maybe in the 30s or maybe in the 20s or maybe something like that. And now we own all these businesses and we worked really hard to get it. So therefore, it's assumed that the person on the other end who doesn't have it is not working hard. And that's the assumption. And I appreciate your question because it's a hard question to ask. A lot of people, they'll think it and it'll affect their relationship with people of color, especially Black people, but they don't voice it. So I appreciate your strength in asking the question. But I would like to answer the question, like to go back to the end of the Civil War. The end of the Civil War in, let's say, 1865, there were a lot of Black people who entered politics. We had Black senators, we had Black mayors, we had Black people in government, a lot of high officials in politics right after the Civil War. This is not people who don't work hard. Right after the Civil War, we had tons of people doing a lot of great things. But when Reconstruction era came in, they were disenfranchised out of these areas of influence, areas of politics, by denying the African American the vote, which he was granted during the 16th Amendment. So now no one Black can vote for these Black people to stay in power, and they all got voted out. So now we have been disenfranchised from political power, and this is a resource that people need. Freshly after that, we're talking about the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, when this took place. Black people said, okay, without that, we're just going to isolate ourselves and just do well on our own, right? Because a lot of my immigrant brothers and sisters, they make this statement as if they say, wow, let me educate Black people on how to get ahead. So I remind them that in 1921, there was a town called, the nickname for it was Black Wall Street, but it was Rosewood in Tulsa. It was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So Black Wall Street was in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. This was a very wealthy Black community, extremely wealthy. And as you can see by the flyer here, there were over 600 businesses, 21 churches, 21 restaurants, 30 grocery stores. These are all Black owned. A movie theater, 6 private planes. This is how wealthy this Black community was in 1921. They had a hospital, a bank, a post office. So when people say Black people must not work hard, I mean, because I worked hard and I achieved. So I don't understand why they can't make it. We have done that. And what was our reward for doing so well in the American system? What was our reward for that? Is that there was animosity built in a local white neighborhoods, and they found an excuse to start riots against Black people. An excuse always been, especially that time, is that some Black man tried to steal the flower of a white woman. So the white woman was used as a tool against the Black community. And as you can see on that in this particular case, they used a white woman, and they used that to attack this city and destroy Black families. They killed so many people, lynched so many people. They burned down buildings. They took children and they killed them. They shot into people's homes. People were afraid for their lives. The first time an American city was bombed from the air was Tulsa, Oklahoma, by white supremacists bombing a Black town, the first time in our history. So as you can see on our second slide, that it is an actual disaster. You can see this is an actual live picture from Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. And you can read the caption there. It's an archival photo of smoke over Tulsa, Oklahoma, the skyline during 1921 riot. And the source is from the Library of Congress. It's not something some Black guy drew up and made this. This photo is from the Library of Congress. This place was destroyed. And the wealth, the reason why they called it Black Wall Street is that the wealth of that place, if it existed today, it would be a Beverly Hills. It would be a Manhattan. And we would think, okay, that's a shining jewel of Black progress, of Black hard work, Black dedication, of Black self-reliance. But then we were rewarded with riot, murder, and lynching. And this is not the only time. There was another time in Rosewood, Florida. And I don't have a picture of that one. In Rosewood, Florida, it was another affluent Black community that was coming up. This is 1923, 2 years later, in a totally separate area. And it was burned down and destroyed. And what was the reason? Black man, some white flower. Both of them were lies. They were lies just to start this riot. People were murdered, people were lynched and destroyed this Black affluent town in Rosewood, Florida. And people had to hide in the swamps, in the woods for days until they could get out with their families. They had to keep their kids from crying. They were hungry. They were searching around just to try to survive in these woods. Now, this is simply, I don't want to go too far with it, but this is simply Tulsa, Oklahoma and Rosewood, Florida. How about the other towns that we have no records? That many, and we do have many more records, right? But I'm not going to talk about the rest of them. But on top of the records we have, what about the towns that we don't hear about? So we worked hard, and we were rewarded with hate and violence. No one wanted to see, if they weren't doing as well, someone Black achieving the American dream when they are white and they haven't achieved it yet. So this animosity was built into them because of white supremacy. White supremacy does not belong in the human vocabulary. Neither does Black supremacy. Neither does Asian supremacy, yellow, no supremacy in the human. So when this idea crept into the minds of the white man and white woman, they developed a resentment for seeing successful non-white peoples. So when we come up to this point, through the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, in my particular neighborhood that I grew up with was very low income. It seemed like it would be by design. And we thought in our community that it was by design. Other people outside of the community thought we were just lazy. But if you look up a process called redlining in America, it started in 1935. And there's a book out called The Color of Law. There's a book out in 1935, the Federal Housing Authority, not just some white supremacist secret group, not some KKK organization, the Federal Housing Authority decided to segregate communities of color into desirable, undesirable communities. And what they did is they drew red lines around people of color community, and they made it harder for people to get loans for homes. And they made it higher. If you did get a loan, you had to pay a higher interest rate. And if you're opening a business or have a business in these areas, you have to pay a higher insurance rate. So the flight of businesses moved out of the Black community, jobs moved out of the Black community, the taxes that in revenue from those businesses and those homes also left the Black community. So leaving it with no taxes to repair streets, repair roads, to make plants and parks and waterways. All this is by the design. And you can see from this book, it's a good book on the subject, not the only book, The Color of Law, A Forgotten History on How the Government Segregated America. Now, in this federal housing authority, they promulgated this redlining to separate these houses and basically defund the housing. When you defund an area, at that time particularly, the taxes go into your police force. A smaller police force meant crime could enter your community unopposed. There's not enough police. If your buildings are burning down, there's not enough fire. There's not enough emergency services. You can die from a simple survivable condition. But if you don't have someone come to treat you because there's not enough services, this is what happened to that community. And it's a remnant of that type of community. And it went on for so long. 1969, finally, from 1935 to 1969, the Fair Housing Act was created. Fair Housing Act was something that tried to undo the Federal Housing Department when they did that. So the Federal Housing Act was created. And then 1975, the home mortgage disclosure to make sure that people are not using that same tactic to make sure that they give preferential treatment to mortgage. So some transparency. So it was by design that there were dilapidated homes, not enough services, broken down roads, telephone poles, no grass. The grass is never greener on that side because of the flight of businesses, the flight of opportunities. People had to travel far to get a good job. And if you didn't have a car and the public transportation didn't go there, you're limited to smaller jobs. So now you have to go to McDonald's because you can get to McDonald's. And I'm not saying anything bad about our service workers or our people who clean the hotels. We need all of them, and they're beautiful workers and they're dedicated workers. But those are the type of jobs that Black people had access to because of this process, which was by design. So when you look at it, 1975, historically speaking, was yesterday, 1975. So we still trying to climb out of that generational historic oppression of our communities. So that's how our communities got that way, that process and many others.
You know, I actually had no idea. It's like a, you know, hearing you, and I know this is like your history and you know all this, but it's so hard. It's so hard to hear what you're saying. You know, I'm thinking, you know, I'm Jewish. And I could see someone Jewish doesn't have to, you don't know if they're Jewish or not. It's not obvious. And if they want to hide it, they can. Not that they would, because we're very proud, but it's like, I could see like what you're talking about. It's like, there's nothing you can do. And the color, you know, the beautiful color that you have of your skin, it's like, it can't be hidden. And so you can kind of systemically do things against, you know, people that have that color. Yeah, it's just, I don't know about you, Kathy, but it's just so hard to hear this and accept like, wow, this is a truth.
Michelle, go ahead, Yusef.
I was just thanking her for her observation. It was a very clear observation.
Yeah. And Michelle, part of what I'm hearing from you is that that this is sort of a surprise for you, that you hadn't heard this before.
You know, like I'm seeing the injustices today, every day. You keep seeing it over in your face all the time, but I didn't realize, I'll be honest, the extent, the history, why we are today where we are today. It just didn't happen. And the resistance against equality, because every day you read article after article after article, and it's all the same, you know, oppression. But what's surprising to me, and what's, you know, I'm feeling it in my heart listening to Yusef, is like, it's just like, it's been this way. And I didn't see it. I didn't recognize it.
And
you know?
part of it, Michelle, I would say is also, I know you're kind of taking personal responsibility for this, But part of that is, I think it is, you mentioned the word systemic. I, of course, majored in psychology in undergrad, but I double minored in American history and music. And I can promise you, at least from my recollection, which I don't know, that's such a good thing to put my promise on, but I learned a lot about the Industrial Revolution, about agricultural, the move from agriculture to the industries and urbanization of America. I did not hear much about redlining and many
Yeah,
of
me
the
too.
issues that Yusef is bringing up.
Me
Right?
too.
And it was really, don't let my kids hear this, but YouTube videos, where I started hearing more, and of course reading articles, but really it's sort of this ragtag, try to find my way to that education versus it being a part of the mainstream education.
It's not. I've never heard of it.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
how could that be? Yeah.
I gave a talk earlier today, and I was, adding some portions of history that is just not taught and is left out, even if you might know about a thing. And there's certain things that people just don't know about. For example, a lot of people haven't heard of mercantilism. And mercantilism is, the root of it is merchandise, for a merchant to sell and buy things. So that brought us into the Revolutionary War, the war that ended in 1776. But what people don't realize is, well, first they talk about how America was upset at Britain for taking advantage of their commercial industry, taking advantage of their economics. So America said, okay, we send you raw materials for cheap, and you sell it back to us after you refine it for a higher price. This is unfair to us as Americans because we're working hard for this product to get to you. The logs that we cut down, the tobacco that we've grown, you take the log, you turn it into a table, and you send it back to me for a higher price than I paid for the piece of log. Or you take the cotton that I send to you and you turn it into a shirt and some socks, and you charge me more than all the cotton I gave to you. The tobacco that we send you, you turn it into cigarettes and you sell it to me for more than the tobacco I gave you. So they felt this injustice between Britain and America. But what they don't teach us, that the other part of the party that's not mentioned is the slave labor that chopped down those woods, that drug those trees and put them where they need to be so it can go over there, that they got 0 cents, nothing but $0 and abuse. The people who were growing the tobacco, the people who were picking the cotton, those people were exploited. And that part of the history is not taught. We'll talk about mercantilism and we'll leave out the Black experience. And that's the way history is taught in our schools.
Yusuf, you mentioned the kind of challenges in different systems that you've had with redlining. Can you also talk about some of the other, kind of systemic challenges? One I think about is right here in our face nowadays, which is COVID. That COVID affects Black Americans disproportionately. And, I am a professor at the School of Medicine at UCSD, and that's something that we talk about quite a bit with our medical students is other health disparities in many other areas for minorities. And so could you talk a little bit about what other challenges that you have?
Yes, let me start with the medical system, the challenges in the medical system, the ethnic biases in not only the medical system, but access to the medical system, which is very, very important. A lot of people may ask, like we're using the example, COVID. COVID, they'll say, well, COVID is a virus. It's not looking at who it's affecting. So how come Black people are dying? Are they weaker people or something like this? I've heard various crazy theories. But here's the thing. COVID spreads from close contact. Low-income areas are stacked one on top of another. So this systemic racism now plays out when there's such a communicable disease or any communicable disease. That coupled with the lack of access to medication, lack of access to healthcare. This lack of access makes it so that Black people won't go to the medical doctor unless they're quote unquote dying of a thing. We use the emergency room as our medical treatment facility because we can't afford healthcare insurance. We can't afford to have a regular private doctor. So a lot of people that circumvent the system, they would use the emergency room as a medical doctor. That's your emergency room. So they've been enculturated to wait when it comes to receiving healthcare. And the fact that they're stacked one on top of another makes it they're more vulnerable to these issues. And as well as being in a low income area, it is high with pollutants. So they have risk factors that are developed from this redlining and devaluing the Black community, like smog, like asthma. All these things make the breathing system very vulnerable, the asthma and reactive airways. So when COVID-19 hit, it hit the vulnerable communities really, really hard. And the vulnerable communities suffered from the legacy of white supremacy and oppression of Black communities. And this is why you see the increase of people of color, Black and brown, but particularly Black people in housing projects. I don't know if you've ever seen the housing projects that are stacked one on top of another, skyscraper projects, and people are just clumped in there together. They can't go anywhere. How can you escape the close contact with other families when you live in a skyscraper of families? So it's not single homes, you don't have a yard, you don't have a fence around your property, nothing like that. So in that regard, COVID-19 hit people of color very hard. But also, when I was in the military, there was a young lady, she came to me and she was concerned about her having the herpes virus. So she had the herpes virus, according to her. And I explained to her, I asked her, did they do all the tests that's required for determining whether someone has herpes? They said, no, they just did a visual inspection. They said that I have herpes and I've been on medication for years now. So this is absolutely wrong. And what is it based in? It's based off the idea that Blacks are more promiscuous. So when you see something in the genital region, you're going to say, jump automatically, not us here, of course, but people will jump automatically to, oh, this person must be promiscuous and it's herpes. I'm not going to do a swab test. I'm not going to do a microscope test. I'm not even going to do a blood test. No blood test was done on her. She was assumed to be promiscuous. She was given medication for the rest of her life for a disease she did not have. So what she had was shaving bumps. Black people have curly hair. So when Black men shave, we get shaving bumps. You can see it more obviously. But when Black women shave in their bikini region, they also get these bumps. And when they saw the irritation from this, was called pseudofolliculitis barbae, when they saw these pustules from the ingrown hairs, they assumed it was herpes and gave her medicine for the rest of her life. So the cultural understanding, the cultural diversity is not, the cultural biases are not addressed in even the medical system. When I started taking care of her, first thing I did was send her to get her blood test. We got a simple blood test. And the blood test came back negative for herpes simplex virus. Then we got her off the medication and she was so relieved that somebody cared enough that she just cried as she tried to thank me. And I cried trying to tell her not to thank me. This is what you're supposed to do as just a feeling human being. And she just couldn't get the words out. But this is common to think that Black people have a higher pain tolerance. So they get lower pain medication, pain management. They, for some reason, they believe Black people can just tolerate more. So there's biases in the medical field as well when it comes to research and development of drugs. They need more than white people in this area because Black people do respond, people of different ethnic backgrounds respond at a different toxicity for medication. And they don't have a lot of people of color in these medical testings for very serious things. For example, cancer research. They have very few people of color in cancer research. Now, the way that works is if it takes a higher dose to make effective change in an African American, which sometimes it does, depending on the medication, then if you give them the standard white person dose, and I don't want people to think that you got to go white, Black, and all these things, but you need to be culturally sensitive. That they're not gonna survive the treatment because it's not at a level that'll take care of the disease. And then on the other hand, someone of Asian descent normally takes a lower dose than other people. So now you give them a white dose, and now they reach toxicity. Now they have problem with their organs because we didn't take the difference in genetic makeup when we prescribe drugs. So there's not a target effort to get Asians into medical research. There's not a target to get African Americans into medical research, and then we suffer from it. I was a phlebotomist. I drew blood, not only a phlebotomist, but one of the things I did, I drew blood. Black people suffer more needle sticks than anyone else. They are tortured when they have to go draw blood, and all of us need to submit blood. But Black people have to come home with all these Band-Aids on them. Why? They say because, oh, we couldn't see your veins, your dark complexion. You feel for veins that you can't see. You don't just go sticking around in a person. This is just amazing how people do that. And people thought I just had a super talent for drawing blood. They would call me to draw blood in the ER. They would call me to draw blood, especially if it's a person of color. But I just told them, you just have to care enough to take your time and search for veins of people that skin complexion doesn't allow you to see it on the surface. So when I used to go and people have all these marks on them, and they're crying, they're saying, I don't care what's happening to me. I don't want my blood tested, just period. And I have to beg them to allow me. And I have to make fun and make them smile. Just, I'll give you one shot, I guarantee you. And if I don't get this shot, then you can give me a needle. They kind of relax. I get the blood drawn and they cry. They cry. I do it one time. They're like, why don't you teach these other guys? It's something I have to teach them that should be innate, that you have to take your time and be sensitive to people of color. But I had to teach that. So, and that's just in the medical field. So there's a lot of other fields that, and we could talk about housing, we could talk about education, we could talk about just simple joining a gym. When I was in the military, we had a gym on the base, of course, and I was in Bethesda, Maryland. And we didn't want to, me and my roommate, we wanted to get a gym at the Bally's up the street in Bethesda. It's an upper class area of Maryland. Some people know of Bethesda. It's a very affluent town. So we went to the Bally's there, and he put an application, I put in an application. Both of our applications were denied. They say we didn't make enough money. We were junior in the military, so we didn't think much of it. A couple years later, this big blow up about this Bally's. They were turning down Black people. Me and my roommate, we were Black. They were turning down Black people from joining the Bally's because they didn't want them in there. And this is how they did it. So that the person on the other end who approves it doesn't know that you're Black or white because they don't ask race. When the person gives you the application and you return it to them, they put a little kind of symbol, little scribble mark on the end to let them know that this person, this applicant, is a person of color. That way the person accepting or denying can deny that they did it based on race. This is called systematic. This is systemic. Systemic is based on systems of oppression of people of color. So a lot of people got together and did a class action lawsuit. We, as military people, we didn't think we could do anything like that, so we didn't even get involved. But I just want you to know that this class action lawsuit against the Bally's in Bethesda, Maryland, was due to their systematic oppression of Black people to keep them out of the system against the law. And they just get creative on how to do that when it comes to housing, when it comes to pools, when it comes to, you name it. This systematic system is going on all over, even in our law enforcement. And we see the big tragedies that's going on with systematic racism in even law enforcement. When it comes to law enforcement, we have not only the cops on the street, but we also have the law system with judges and lawyers. And we find that people of color get harsher sentences for the exact same crime. So you can imagine, what about your daughter? What about your son who's out there? Not that they're committing crimes, but let's say, unfortunately, your child makes a mistake and they say, okay, it'll be fun. They're not a criminal, but they say it'll be fun to take this car and go for a joyride. It's a nice, pretty color. It's a nice shade. Let me just take this and go for a joyride. It happens. Well, the Black kid that does that will receive grand theft auto, which is a felony. And the white kid that does it will get joyriding, which is not a felony. You could just be on probation, or you could just be left off with a warning. One person's life is destroyed. Well, at least it's hard to recover from. The other has nearly no impact on their life. They might be on punishment, and their parents tell them their allowance is cut off. Let's say two people, a black and a white person, they enter someone's home or on their property. The black kid will get break-in and entry, which is a felony. The white kid gets trespassing, which is not. You can recover from trespassing. You can't recover. Well, you can, but it's harder to recover from break-in and entry. And these harsher penalties, and sometimes in the same judge, the same age, the same crime, the same background, it's the same judge, two totally different. I wish I had a slide for that one. Totally different sentencing. One kid gets 15 years in jail, another kid gets 2 or 3 years in probation. This is destroying to the Black community when you have missing children due to legal system. You have missing fathers. With missing fathers is already a problem. And you have fathers caught up in the legal justice system by some judge who judges more harshly with people of color. And they've done a study within the law, the legal justice system, to find that this is true. That there are harsher penalties to people of color, black and brown, harsher penalties, longer sentences than whites. This is destroying to the families. The woman I mentioned earlier in the medical system, when she was told she had herpes, which she didn't, she assumed her husband gave it to her. Destroyed her family, destroyed her relationship with her husband, which destroyed the relationship with her children. So this has ramifications that reach deep into the Black family, whether it's in medical, whether it's in law, whether it's in housing, whether it's in the ability to get a job. You know, these things they reach deep into the Black family, and not the white family doesn't have to suffer that as much. But I ask our white brothers and sisters, our white allies, to please put yourself in those shoes. What if your child was driving down the street, and we reverse the statistics that white kids are now 3.5 times as likely to be pulled over, 21 times as likely in some other cities to be pulled over and searched and have their rights violated. And when they come home, I got pulled over again. Why are you late for dinner? I got pulled over again. Why is your face red? Oh, I got smacked by this officer who thought I was mouthing off to him. How come you have this road rash on your face? Well, I was standing there with my hands up, and an officer drop kicked me from behind. There's a video on that. Law enforcement, 3 or 4 law enforcement stopped and told a Black guy to stop. He understood that he was in trouble. He didn't even do anything, but he stopped and put his hands up in the middle of the street. The cop ran to him and drop kicked him from the back for no reason. So now little Timmy or little Eric, they're coming home and they've been drop kicked by an officer. Wouldn't you be livid? Wouldn't you rush right down to law enforcement and say, we need justice? We need people to act with officers to treat us with dignity and the rights of an American? That's all we're asking for from law enforcement. We're highly likely to be stopped. And the weird thing about the stops in San Diego, the SDSU and the Stop Coalition did the data. So that's SDSU and the Stop Coalition. They did data on stops, law enforcement stops. And of course, law enforcement stops of people of color were really high and compared to whites. But here's the striking thing. Whites had a higher chance of possessing contraband guns, drugs, open containers, which you're not supposed to have. So white people had more likely to have these things. Black people were less likely to have it because they know they always get stopped, right? So now the white person is driving around drunk or high or whatever, and still not going to be stopped. You don't necessarily have to say to a white child going home to their parents, be careful. Well, for a Black child, you're not sure if they're coming home. You're not sure if they're going to get stopped. They're going to be conceived as a threat and killed on the way home. So we accept our children home. We want them to come home safe. But the Black mother, the Black father, they're not sure if their kid, they're just blessed every time they walk through the door. The Black family, they're blessed when their father walks through the door from a hard day of work. And even if you're in your own home, we know Sandra Bland, She was sleeping in her own bed, Sandra Bland, and the police broke into her home. They shot her while she was in her bed. So people say, well, if you're not breaking the law, you have nothing to worry about. She was breaking the law in her bed? I don't think so. The doctor in New York who was in his own home, when he reached for his wallet to prove his ID that he lived in this house, he was shot dead in his own home. He's a doctor, a professor. He was a professor. These people, they misunderstand the relationship between law enforcement and people of color, which the culture of policing is to be more oppressive to people of color. Now, I'm not saying every cop is that way, but there's enough culture of harsh policing on communities of color and low-income communities that the community feels the difference. When we see lights in our back window, our heart jumps out, we can barely breathe, we're very anxious. And even if the lights aren't on, we're like, man, my registration, and I have white friends that say, man, I think that way too. So what's the difference? Oh, you don't think this way. You don't think my life is now in danger. You may say, oh, the inconvenience. You may say, oh, this guy is being a jerk. But now I have to wonder if I'm going home to my children. I have to wonder if I'm being racially profiled. I was walking down the street in Los Angeles. I had a tie on. I had a fedora and a suit. The officer pulled me over and asked me, in my tie, in my suit, was I just in a fight? I'm like, no, sir, I was not in a fight. He said, well, and this is the phrase that almost all Black men hear. You fit the description of somebody who is breaking the law, so I have to detain you. You fit the description.
Oh my God.
So he handcuffed me. He took all the stuff out of my pocket. He handcuffed me and put me in the back of the squad car. And he stayed outside the car talking on his radio. On his radio, and the radio in the car, they're the same channel. They were looking for a Hispanic male, taller than me, in a red t-shirt. I'm in an orange dress shirt with a matching tie and a fedora and a suit jacket on. That man was running west or something. I'm walking east in a suit. I was detained, handcuffed, because I fit the description. After it was all over, I asked the man, I'm still not sure why you detained me, because listening to the description, I don't fit that description. Why did you detain me? I'm an African-American male in a suit. You're looking for a Latino, taller man in a red t-shirt who was in a fight and running west. He got so upset. He started yelling at me, yelling. And this was at night on not a secluded road, but nobody was on this street at the time. And as he's screaming at me, you mind your business. This is my job. I have to do this. I didn't know if you were the person. As he's yelling at me, I see my life flashing before my eyes. And I say to my friends, I don't think you felt that way in front of a cop. You saw your life flashing before your eyes because they were upset at you. So we can't emotionally bridge the experience of African Americans in law enforcement, African Americans in lawyers, African Americans in judges, African Americans in the legal justice system, Black males and Black females in this system of destroying families. So these systems are oppressive, if not neglective, and really just a problem in the existence of Black America.
Yeah, like I'm hearing you, and I can't. I'll be honest with you, I can't relate. And I don't know, Kathy, for you, your thoughts, but it's like that has not been my experience. It has not been my experience of many of my friends, although I do have one of my close friends. She was telling me something very similar to what you're describing. She took a fun little vacation with her family. She's from, she's Black, and she did a fun little trip in California, drove back to Arizona, and they got pulled over. I was like, oh, wow, what happened? Why'd you get pulled over? She's like, he didn't give a reason why he pulled us over. And my partner got frisked and there was no explanation. My daughter's in the back, freaking out. And, another thing she told me, again, completely aligned to what you're describing, she said is like her babies, she calls them her babies. They're in their 20s. And she's like, I'm scared every night about my babies. Every night, I don't sleep at night. It's affecting my health. And I think to myself, my son, I never, ever have to worry about him. It never even crosses my mind. and it's just so heartbreaking to hear, like, this is someone else, like, that's your reality. And I like I said, like, I live in the same country, and yet that's not something that I have ever considered or thought about.
And Michelle, I'm not a white woman. I'm a person of color. Oh, Amanda? Okay, sorry about that. I was hearing Amanda talking in the background there. Apologies. So you were saying, so I'm not a white woman, right? But that is my experience with law enforcement. Is I see them as safety, as security.
Yeah.
When I see a policeman go by, or a police person, a policewoman, or a police car go by, it's like wonderful. They're keeping my neighborhood safe. It is the complete opposite experience. When I get pulled over, I think, okay, no, speeding, but I don't
Yes.
worry. The most I worry about is I have to go to driving school, or I have to pay a big fine. But I don't worry with my kids. And not only is it sort of neutral, but it's really the opposite experience, which is I view them as being safer when there's law enforcement around. And so I think of a lot of people, a lot of white people who probably have a similar experience as I do. And so it's really hard, I think, for them to kind of understand. I think Yusef kind of bridging that understanding of your experience, which is so disparate from our experience, and to understand how systematically it can be such a different and life-threatening experience for you. And I think about your mom and Michelle, your friend, and my work is with people of anxiety and stress, and knowing that chronic levels of stress and anxiety leads to, or can contribute to, health disparities or health issues like cardiovascular disease, hypertension. And so I think of, when you have just the moment your kids are born, and for decades you have this, kind of fear response and the stress response whenever they're out and about, what that leads to in terms of health disparities. Just another contributing cause to that, right? Not just implicit biases from healthcare professionals, but also this sort of lifelong, and actually, in addition to that, not just that anxiety and that fear, but Yusef, I was thinking back when you said that you were trying to apply to the gym and you were declined. Again, that's now in that neighborhood. Sure, you can go running or, whatever, do things outside, but you didn't have access to those methods of keeping you in shape and healthy, especially if you're working out late at night or on weekends in the evenings. So again, that's another sort of systematic way of leading to that health disparities that we see in great numbers.
What's interesting, we talked about the gym, is that someone, a white brother or sister, they probably wouldn't think twice about going for a jog at night. For me, it could be life or death. Going for a jog at night, a Black man running down the street for what? Is what, law enforcement. I've been stopped one time just from jogging. I was still in the military. I was jogging, keeping in shape. It was time for our fitness test. I was jogging at night, and he cut in front of me and cut me off. And he wanted to see what was going on. Why am I running? What am I running? I'm just jogging. I'm exercising. But I was exercising while Black.
Yusef, that reminds me of this article that I just recently read that, really highlights that, lack of relating, which is so sad. So the Surgeon General of United States, it's like one of the most prestigious jobs, one of the most difficult jobs to get for anybody. And he's Black. And he wrote an article saying, when he saw the whole situation with George Floyd, he says, that could have been me. If that police officer wouldn't have known what I do for a living, or bothered to ask what I do, that could have been me. And he said, further in the article, he was saying, I have to think about the way that I dress. I have to think about the way that I talk. I have to think about things. And he went on. And I think probably one of the things is what you're describing. He'd have to think twice before he jogs at night. Mm-hmm. And I picked up the phone and I called another friend of mine who's white. And I said, what do you think that means? What are those other things that this guy has to consider? Because I don't know what that means. And, we're trying to sit there and brainstorm, like, what does it mean? What are the things? And he's coming up with his hypothesis. It's not even based on fact or direct experience. He's like, oh, maybe he can't wear a hoodie. Maybe he can't. And I was thinking, well, what else do I not know? What else do I not think about? What else? What other things is your daily reality that I would have to really use my brain power to think about, because I can't use direct experience. Mm-hmm. So you're describing this jogging at night, and what else is there? What are some of the other things that we don't think about?
There was here in San Diego an older gentleman who does his morning walks. He goes for a walk in San Diego, and he kind of speed walks, I guess. So he carries a little stick with him because sometimes dogs come out and try to chase him. So he carries this little stick to keep them away. So when he walks with a walking stick, right? But he keeps this stick. He was stopped and arrested for carrying a auto theft implement, not a walking stick, not a stick to keep dogs away. He was arrested. He's a senior. He was arrested. And it took civil rights organizations. At that time, it was I'll think of it in a minute, but local people and civil rights organizations to come in and get him out of jail. We had to pay his bond and everything. And then the city dropped the case. They had nothing on him. Even the community knows him as the walker. They call him something like that, the walker, some kind of fast walker. They have a nickname for him for years, and he has this stick to keep animals away. But because he was walking while black with a stick, it's breaking into cars implement. One time I was sitting, and sorry to make another example about myself, but it just popped in my mind. I was sitting with a friend. We were carpooling. And when we got back to where I picked her up from her car, we were sitting in the car and we were just talking about, the day and the things that we went through. And an officer drove behind me and blocked us in. And he claims that he thought that she was a prostitute and I was a John. I'm like, well, where'd you get that from? We're just sitting here talking. Where did you get that from? And she was we were both well-dressed, because we were going to a function. And so they came and they asked me for my driver's license and registration, which I gave him, no doubt. No doubt I gave it to him really right away. And then this partner asked my friend, who was white, for her license, which he doesn't need her license. She's not even driving. He asked her for her license and registration. And she responded in a privileged way. What do you need this for? I'm not giving you anything. And then she opened the door to step out the car to confront the man. And he slammed the door on her and said, get back in the car, and started saying all this stuff. She's never been treated like that in her life. She was never treated like this in her life. And I begged her, please. I thought I was going to really be the one killed, but for her sake, but I thought she might get hurt as well. But I'm like, please calm down. Let this process go its course and try not to do anything crazy. She lives here. She lives in Carlsbad. So, and I was saying, don't do anything. She was so frustrated. They finally gave us back our documents because we didn't do anything wrong. They drove off because we didn't do anything wrong. And she burst out into tears. So I tried to cheer her up, and I was like, well, at least you were black for 15 minutes. Just trying to make her laugh, try to get her mind off of it, like, hey, you were black for 15 minutes. Who can say, you're biracial now? So just trying to get her mind off of it.
So my friend, I was texting her about this topic, and she says to me, well, having, racism is better than getting a beating. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, who's even talking about beating or racism? Like, for her to even use those words, like, I'd be furious. And like, you're right. you know, like with the white privileged way to behave. Just a second. So yeah, I wanted to ask you a couple of things, but I know we're almost running out of time and I could just sit here and listen to you endlessly. But I know that one of the things I was just curious about really quick is with Juneteenth. I know it's happened this weekend. And, you know, just quickly, like one of the things like I was, you know, curious about your thoughts is this whole idea of making this a holiday. And, you know, there's already 4th of July, there's Independence Day. And I know that that's something that, you know, a lot of people are saying, hey, this needs to be a holiday. What are your thoughts? What are some things that go through your mind about that?
Well, Juneteenth, it's the actual day was yesterday, June 19th, and it commemorates the day when the slaves in Galveston, Texas, heard that the Emancipation Proclamation was issued and that they were free, and they heard the pronouncements from a Union general, and they felt free. And African Americans since 1865, June 19th, has considered that our Independence Day. Some people who are hyper nationalists, right? They're very nationalist. They say we already have an Independence Day. It's July 4th. You need to fall in line with us. But what they forget, or maybe they don't care, is July 4th is from 1776. 1776 to 1865 is 89 years of slavery and oppression every 4th of July, since the first 4th of July. That's 89 4th of Julys that people in chains had to witness celebration of freedom and independence. 89 years of rape and murder and oppression, 89 years of 4th of Julys before the emancipation was signed and actually able to take effect. So the 4th of July, for people who, like me, who find Juneteenth more appropriate for my cultural background in America, we prefer that over 4th of July. There are people, African Americans, who celebrate 4th of July, and there's no problem. It's just that we find that this 4th of July really has something to do with us, and the original 4th of July didn't. It had to do with white Americans and their freedoms from white Britain. The same time that we were being oppressed by this country, for 89 years of liberation, we were 89 years of oppression. So that's the difference. And that's why African Americans, historically speaking, we say that the Juneteenth actually affects, or it relates to our subculture of American history more than 4th of July does. And I'm not saying no one bars African Americans from participating in 4th of July, but they should know the history and the background of Juneteenth.
You know, I can't even imagine, you know, like watching, like you're saying, celebration when you're still shackled. It's like, I can't even imagine that, you know?
For decades and decades, for 89 years.
89 years, almost a century of people being born and dying. A person could have been born in 1776 and they would have been dead before. They could have been, especially back then, they could have been dead before the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah. So Yusef, I echo what Michelle says. We could sit here for another 5 hours. This has been, we're so grateful for your time. And for so generously giving us the labor of having this really heart-to-heart conversation, and especially for disclosing about yourself. We really appreciate that. I know that you don't do that often. We really hope that you come back so we can continue these conversations with you. One of the things that we could close out today with is sort of a call to action. What can Michelle and I, and any of our viewers who are watching who are touched by your stories, what can we do at this point? And I recognize that, of course, we can Google, and we do, and we should read, and we should amplify the Black voices in our community. And that was my hope with having you come on today. Is there any kind of remaining words that you have for us that you would like for us?
Yes, I would like to say to my everybody, but particularly my non-Black and brown community, there are a lot of things you can do if you're not the type of person that marches in the street. You're not the type of person that are at rallies. There's still something all of us can do. We can call our elected officials and demand that bills and acts be implemented to make a fair standing for all people. For example, here in San Diego, on Tuesday, this Tuesday, the 23rd, I think it is, the city council, the county council, they're making a vote on whether to implement police reform. And with this police reform also comes medical reform for people of color in the medical system, especially when it comes to mental health. So these kind of supports people need to be involved in. There's a bill coming out called AB 1196. This is to ban the carotid restraint all throughout California, the state of California. Then we're going to take that to the US level to ban neck restraints of anyone to make sure that we avoid the tragedies of George Floyd and Eric Garner. So there are plenty of things going on in legislation that needs your vote. There's only 13% of African Americans in the nation. There's over 60% of whites, people who are claimed to be whites in this nation. If you multiply 13 4 times, you're still short the number of votes you would need to make anything happen if white people are not in support. So I think the best thing for us to do is to keep action, is to monitor what's going on in your community, especially when it comes to race relations. The San Diego, the Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego, a lot of other civil rights organizations post their information on our website, on our Facebook. So Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego is a great one-stop source to find out what's going on, whether there's bills or acts or movements or initiatives that need support of our righteous brothers and sisters. And we need you. We love you and we need you.
So first call to action right now for us to do when we get off of this is we go to the Facebook page for Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego.
Yes.
And we like the page and we follow it. And
Yes.
we look for the legislation. Thank you so much, Yusef Miller, a member, again, of the Racial Justice Coalition, very active in our local community here. Michelle Maor, hearkening from Australia right now. But thank you for joining us. And
thank you.
Tune in to Ask Dr. Kat. Again, please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed your talk here tonight. And thank you again to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.